if you're interested in anything, you can learn anything, no matter whether you have the academic qualifications for it. This AI for conservation community is relatively small, so I still think it's like a very small niche community, but it's very tight knit in a sense. A lot of technologies now, I think it's so nice that you don't have to be at a specific place to be able to contribute. So just if you have a laptop, that should be enough.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Resilience Tracks, the podcast where we follow the tracks of the next generation of environmental leaders working to build a more resilient future here on Earth. Today we are joined by Viktor Domazetoski. Viktor is currently a PhD student researching AI applications in ecology, environmental monitoring, and nature conservation. Getting his start more broadly in computer science, he began to transition into interdisciplinary sciences like physics, neurosciences, before leaning more richly into computational ecology. Some of his research has included facial recognition for harbor seals, AI-based analysis of coral reef structure, health and biodiversity, and most recently, using AI responsibly through evaluating the biases in AI models for camera trap analysis. All of this is just the smallest taste into Viktor's dynamic and rich applications of computational tools for conservation work, which we will dig deeper today in this episode. So welcome, Viktor. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited to have this talk.
Yes, so to begin, I'm kind of curious about the story from going to CS, computer sciences, and then to narrowing down and refining into the conservation kind of setting.
Yeah, so I agree. It's like I don't think my path was sort of the traditional one that many people have taken, both from like going from CS to environmental sciences at the end, but also like the path that sort of I took throughout. So basically, I started off with computer sciences. That was sort of I've always been interested in math and like applications in that sense. And computer science, at that point, I was still young, and I feel like a lot of high school people are struggling to figure out, okay, what should they go into? But in retrospect, I think it was like the perfect trajectory for me because I feel like computer sciences in general have so many applications in different aspects. So whether it's within AI, but also outside of AI. And another additional factor that I really like is that I'm from Macedonia, where you're a bit limited with like what you can do opportunity-wise. So from that aspect, computer science sort of brings you to a digital world where as long as you have like a laptop and internet connection, then you're sort of out there and can focus as much as you want. So that's sort of how I went into that. Afterwards, there was like a very fortunate event. Basically, I didn't plan to end up working in science, but just through a random like string of coincidences, I end up at the Macedonian Academy of Sciences, which is the National Institute for Sciences in Macedonia, and there sort of the entire scientific world was sort of up for the taking in a sense. And that sort of led me to follow my passion that before then I didn't know that that was a thing, but since I figured it out, then I went all in from that aspect. Uh, and basically there, the good thing was that it was such an interdisciplinary group. So you had people working on neuroscience, physics, economics, modeling disease and epidemics. So many different interesting things. And just because how I am as a person, I'm very curious about everything pretty much. I just wanted to try a bit of a taste of everything. So I just try to collaborate as much as I can with everyone. So it was also a bit opportunistic to just like sort of both try to help the people working in their fields, but also from my side, try to figure out, okay, what is actually like what I'm passionate about, what is bringing me forward. And the good thing about computer science and AI is that you have a lot of skills and a lot of things that are interesting in every topic and can be useful to bring to every topic. So from that aspect, I feel like my background was well suited to do different things. Uh, so I had a few years of like trying out different things, seeing what works, what's for me, and everything I really liked, but I didn't feel like sort of the it factor where I was fully passionate and wanted to spend my life on it. And unfortunately or fortunately in science, as you sort of progress through the ranks, so like from your undergrad to your master's to a PhD and further on within academia, you sort of have to specialize a bit, especially when you get to a PhD postdoc aspect. And at that point, I was thinking what I should sort of continue in. And then I decided that ever since I was young, through like documentaries or just going out in nature in general, I was always passionate about uh, nature and protection of nature, as which I think now with climate change, with a lot of anthropogenic pressures, we definitely need more and more people to uh, sort of spend their time and devote their life towards this. And I just based on that, I sort of one day decided, okay, this is sort of what I'm going for. And unfortunately, in Macedonia, in my group, there was no one really working on this. So then that sort of started a new journey. So I went to Germany for my master's in ecological analysis and modeling, and then continued with my PhD. So now I'm sort of at the final stages of this path, and hopefully, I mean, depends, hopefully, but in general, let's see how long I stay on this path or how much I branch out in the future. But there's so many things to do, even within the sort of niche space of AI for conservation, that uh, I'm sort of blessed to have like so many possibilities here.
So, my first question, when I think of computer science, the first thing that kind of comes to my head is Silicon Valley, tech bubbles, and very much the business side of thing. I'm curious what motivated you to pursue a more academic path with things, going from first a master's and then into a PhD.
Yeah. So first to touch on the Silicon Valley aspect, I think computer science in general, that's one way of viewing it and sort of the more default way of viewing it, but also I would say ideologically there's like the computer science which is very different than what sort of you have at Silicon Valley and like all of these tech companies, because on one side I would say computer science has been mostly used uh, to sort of have like these big enormous corporations, but also on the other aspect, I think it's like such a democratic way of providing resources and knowledge and all of these things to everyone. And I sort of try to view myself as that kind of computer scientist compared to the tech status that is within yeah, Silicon Valley or such ecosystems. Uh, so to answer your question, I think computer science in general, just on its own, even without the application aspect, has like so many interesting things that you can do with it, and I think that's sort of why many people get into it, because you have like basically at your fingertips just with a laptop you have a whole world of opportunities to explore what you want, try out different, whether it's programming languages, use cases, or even from like a mathematics point of view, because most of computer science or especially AI that we currently think of is just maths in the background. So I feel like there's so much things to explore there, and as someone with a math background and interest in math, that was always sort of the one of the things I wanted to do when deciding for computer science. And I think academia compared to industry work gives you a bit more freedom and flexibility in terms of what you can do, and even things that aren't maybe profitable in a sense, which I think is the main factor that tech companies are usually going for, but might have like huge advantages or to society. So something like the AI for conservation applications.
And then for the application into conservation, you mentioned kind of always having this love for nature and aspiration through documentaries and media. But was there a specific point in which you realized that computer science could exist in that field? And especially because you said that in your undergraduate studies, there wasn't anyone in your program that was
Yeah.
pursuing something like this.
Yeah. So as I said, I think my first realization was just the after working on so many other different interdisciplinary topics, I was like, okay, it's so nice with AI that you can like work on so many different things, and of course you having the background within that topics like physics, neuroscience helps, but that's also something that you can learn. So I'm on the sense that if you're interested in anything, you can learn anything, no matter whether you have the academic qualifications for it, and there's definitely ways to contribute from that side. And knowing that and sort of exploring all of these different fields, I sort of one day had like a step back that if I'm planning to do this for the rest of my life, I want to like really be devoted to a topic. So I just had like a day where I went through like every possible field I can think of, like astrophysics, uh, neuroscience, as I said, economics, and then sort of went into ecology and conservation. And then I was like, okay, this is it. So then I tried to research a bit what's the state of the field. Are people actually doing this? Is it a possibility or just like a fever dream of mine? But turns out it was a field, and it's still relatively new. I would say state that most of the work has been done in like the last 7 to 8 years, which is good and bad. Obviously, you have a lot of uh, there's a lot of potential because it's such a new field, so there's so many things that still haven't been explored, but also that brings some problems. There aren't that many positions and everything, so it is a bit difficult, but yeah, everything has its good and bad parts.
Yeah, and I have a question about not only the research of what you've done so far, but the implementation. How has it been implementing this quite sophisticated and new technologies in conservation settings, especially when there is a section of conservation that is so field based and so qualitative in some senses that implementing these higher technologies may be quite shockingly new? How has that been?
Yeah.
Have you had any experience with that?
For sure. So I would say, at least currently for my PhD, most of the research I'm doing is a bit more theoretical. So like trying to inform other people that are then doing the applications rather than applying it themselves myself. But in general, I would say there are two sort of aspects to this. So first of all, the application of this technology in conservation has a lot of power, but also, as you say, so much of ecology is like fieldwork based. I don't think that should be replaced. So this is like my sort of view of this technology and why it's so powerful is that it can sort of aid people do things more efficiently, and then let them focus on the things that are really important, like the field work that can't really be changed by technology or the analysis, interpretation of data, or these more qualitative aspects, and allow them to do this by automating other processes that are a bit more tedious, like manual labeling of data, which I think AI has like a big opportunity to sort of add as a use case. And then the other aspect is, as you said, a lot of conservation from a tech perspective is very new. So there are definitely problems in like how we can sort of uh, both from the aspect of the knowledge. So like most conservationists don't have any AI background or even that much of a technical background. So that's one of the biggest problems is how we can make this usable for everyone without having them spend years of their time learning this technology and then having to use them, and then at that point you might be sacrificing more than what you're getting. uh, so that is one aspect. And then additionally, uh, I think the main goal here is that we need to make uh, these systems usable for people despite of their background and despite of their computational resources. So I think that's also a very important thing, that uh, if we want to use AI to get more data, which is at the end the goal is that to monitor biodiversity at such a large scale and to inform like conservation impacts, the goal of AI is to basically produce more data that people can then use to make models or to interpret for policy or for conservation purposes. And if that is sort of the goal, the main things is that this technology should be equitable and used by people no matter what their resources are. And there have been ways of basically doing that. So there are many platforms providing free resources and management and all of these possibilities. So I think as a field, we are on a good track, but obviously there are a lot of other aspects that should be considered that again, since it's such a relatively new field that's still emerging, a lot of people are trying to answer these questions at the same time while research is being done to implement them. So I don't think there's yet a perfect scenario where we have like a perfect use case of, okay, if you want to do this, this is the way how it should be done. But there's a lot of research in this topic.
So, to kind of hone in a little bit, can you describe for the listeners what your PhD is about?
Yeah, so my PhD basically, as I said previously, the goal of AI is to try to acquire more data and basically use all of this data to inform different conservation action or policy action. And the main purpose here, so we have camera trap data. So camera traps are basically cameras you set up in different places, so usually in like national parks or forests, that when an animal passes by, there's an infrared sensor that triggers and then takes a picture of the animal, which is sort of kept as a observation that you can then use. Okay, this animal was seen at this time in this place, and based on a lot of data like this, you can sort of study where animals go, how many they are, what are factors that influence where animals go and where they don't, etc. And the problem that comes with this is that camera traps in itself are a very nice way to monitor biodiversity, but as you scale up the camera traps, so let's say you start with 10 in a national park, then you scale up to 100. Each of these takes like 10, 100,000 images over the course of a few months. And then at that point, you have 1 million images of different animals across your national park. However, because all of these images don't really have any information without using AI, what traditionally happened is that you have to have ecologists that are trained on these animals that can distinguish between the different species found in the national park to know, okay, this is this animal that occurred, this is another animal, and then to basically get the data so that you can then analyze it and do all the important things that come at the end. And sort of AI steps in as like this middle thing where instead of having a person label 1 million images, which is obviously a very manual, boring, labor-intensive task, we want to use AI to automate this process so that at the end you just have the information of where species occur and can just focus on that as an ecologist rather than having to waste time with your data. The problem that comes here is that AI is imperfect, so every AI or every mathematical model has biases, and this could be biases in terms of certain species. So, for instance, charismatic species might have better performance compared to some rare cryptic species. Then for certain habitats that are more complex, like tropical rainforests, we might have worse performance than a savanna, which is a bit easier to see. Then, of course, if the image is taken at night, in generally, it's harder to find the animal and identify it, even for humans, let alone AI. And all of these aspects sort of brought together and then might result that the information that you get from those images is not perfect and might lead to some bad conservation outcomes. So if some rare species are missed or invasive species are missed, then that might sort of lead to new and new problems down the line, and you as the conservationists don't even know it if you sort of rely on these AI systems too much. And my work is basically trying to identify how these models are biased. So looking at site level biases, so as I said, in terms of habitat or location of the camera, as well as species level biases, and then trying to investigate, first acknowledge that these exist and to what level they influence the results, and then try to use some ways to mitigate these biases by including more ecological information within the AI models themselves.
That is super cool. And I'm particularly keen on this idea because I was one of those people sorting through the thousands and thousands of camera trap images. And it was certainly a lot of tedious work. But I'm also kind of curious. I have two kind of questions to go through, so I need to remember not to forget the second one. But the first one is, through the process of sitting with these images and learning to identify the species specifically and stuff, you also capture things that were perhaps outside of the initial intent of camera traps. Like, as you said, camera traps, a big kind of purpose of them is to see where species are, when they are there, and what other ones exist around that same time. But I also found it very useful for capturing perhaps more rare behaviors. So, example, two bucks kind of dueling each other, or bathing in the mud, or anything like that that's more, I guess, how the body is movement in the image. Is there technology right now that could identify that, or the parameters right now in camera trap AI models more confined to just identification within the image?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of research that goes also in this topic. So I would say AI use for camera traps in particular has like several levels of complexity. What I'm working on is mostly species identification and animal detection. So because a lot of these images also are empty, which means that you would just waste time trying to find something that isn't there, and that's sort of the first level of filtering. And these technologies are more like sort of the base level that we need to then
Mm-hmm.
do all of these occupancy models and population trends. But as you said, there's so much more information in camera trap images. So whether it's behavior, species interactions, even like meteorological bycatch and other aspects that are in the image that can be used for a lot of different aspects. And there are more complex AI methods that are sort of also learning how we can identify these things. So when basically answer open-ended questions like this. So outside
Mm-hmm.
of the fact that there's like a lizard in the image, what is that lizard doing? How old it is? What's the sex of the species, etc. So there's definitely a lot of work, but again, since the field is still relatively new, this is all in progress, and wouldn't say that most of AI for conservation is still at that like preliminary prototype research
Mm-hmm.
portion, and use within practical conservation still like a few years ahead, but I hope we'll be there sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and then with your research so far looking into the biases, what are some of the stronger biases that you're seeing, and how substantial are these biases in influencing the results of the analysis?
Yeah, so currently we just have preliminary results. I wouldn't take this sort of for
Mm-hmm.
granted, as it was only done on a specific data set in sub-Saharan Africa, which is still has like diversity and has habitat diversity and like regional diversity, but it's still limited, and we want to expand the scope to like a more global level analysis. But currently, I would say the main things that I'm sort of interested in is that there are biases in terms of the camera model that has been used, so which I think is very important and maybe not talked enough, but just because of how AI works. Uh, if you're training on images of a certain type, so let's say from a certain camera, then the model sort of learns the nuances of that specific camera. So even if you use a camera that is of similar resolution, just because of the way the image is processed, the model might perform like a few percent worse. And again, a few percent maybe doesn't seem like a lot, but if we're talking about a million images, a few percent can be like 10, 20,000 animals that are missed or misclassified that sort of after a while cascades into a bigger problem. So that's one thing I'm specifically noticed, and the other aspect is, of course, regarding species differences, which is sort of the main thing that we're interested in. Um this also depends on the use case of the ecologist afterwards. So that's why also in the bias mitigation research, we don't. I don't think it's possible to get to a point where a model is not biased. So every model is biased. The question is to what extent and what are sort of the directions of those biases. And what I'm thinking about here is whether we can shift the biases in an easy way based on the user's needs. So if you're someone interested in mammals, for instance, even if the model is biased against birds or reptiles, then you don't really care that much about it as long as it performs better for mammals. And that's sort of my thought process going into this. And there definitely is a lot of bias in terms of like different species. So based on how big they are, based on their behavior. So nocturnal species are generally harder to detect just because of their obviously they occur more at night, and models have like a larger problem detecting at night just because of the images that you get are usually black and white that come from like an infrared image. Uh, yeah, I would say those are the main factors I've noticed.
And then for your PhD, how did you land on this topic as compared to the previous work that you've done before?
Yeah, so as I said, the good and bad thing about this AI for conservation community is that it's relatively small. So there's like a few thousand people, I would say, in the world that are working on these topics at different levels. Like, of course, you have people from the AI side, people from the ecology side. So I still think it's like a very small niche community, but it's very tight knit in a sense. So ever since I decided to sort of undertake this journey and go into this AI for conservation path, I decided, okay, I will do a master's in ecology so I can sort of get a bit more perspective from that side as well, and then continue my PhD towards something that is related to AI for conservation. And there, basically, I just received an email from my now supervisor that found me through another person I had contacted for potential possibilities, and then that sort of came out to be a very pleasant surprise and led me to here.
Yes, that's awesome. So, granted that AI, as we mentioned before, has one very specific image, and conservation in some ways has a very different specific image. Have you faced any kind of pushback from any communities or people against the use of AI for conservation?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say I specifically have faced pushback, but I'm also one of the people pushing back on this end. So even though I'm working on AI for conservation and that might bias me in a certain direction, I would specify two things here. So that AI that is used within conservation is very different from the now sort of AI that is used in general. So the current use of AI in the general public is mostly generative AI, which in my opinion has a lot of downsides and should be a bit more regulated, and both from like environmental aspect. So there are severe harms that come from the very very large scale of data and processing that we are using to power all of these large language models, and we can see the impacts on that already. But also from like a usage perspective. So there's a lot of things that AI is beneficial for, so generative AI, but I think we should be a bit more wary about all of the potential bad outcomes that can also get from that aspect. Saying that, AI for conservation is typically a bit different, so we're still working with deep learning models, but not as much with generative AI. And from that side, the environmental impact of the AI that was used is still pretty negligible compared to any generative AI application. Uh, but still, there's like a impact in terms of what I said previously on how it's used. Because as with any new technology, it can aid or uh, add on to the current knowledge of the people that are working on these fields, like the people on the ground, the uh, local communities that are centered around all of these conservation efforts, or it can replace them in a sense. And again, as I said, I think so far we have done good as a community to sort of try to be equitable and responsible in our use and use AI basically as a way to add on to the people's capabilities and basically, as I said previously, replace these manual, boring tasks with AI so that the people can focus on the more meaningful research. But there's definitely the fear that in the future, for instance, grants could go more towards the AI perspective, and then obviously you can lose a bit on the more traditional conservation approaches, and a lot of more aspects on like who owns the data, how is this data gathered, uh, who is contacted before conducting like all of these things to see whether they want camera traps in their own backyard. Because again, conservation is not necessarily like just pure wilderness in places. There are still local communities that live around even like national parks and everything that still have a say into all of these things, because you might also potentially have a lot of aspects due to surveillance and other aspects. So from that side, I wouldn't say there has been that much pushback, but I think from personally, we should still be careful on how we use AI, to which extent, and it's not like a panacea. Basically, it's not AI. I don't believe and at all will be able to like replace conservationists or uh, change the field that much, but I think it has the potential to help the field and add on to it.
Hmm. No, I completely agree. And I guess one of my questions would be, what do you think is one of the bigger worries specifically to conservation and AI? Besides, is there anything besides grant making, maybe an ethical realm that you're worried about?
The main aspects are how it will impact the communities or
Mm-hmm.
the conservations that are already working on these things. So, obviously, if you deploy camera traps in a place that has already had some conservation efforts, this will sort of change the way they do work. And there has been work done on how, for instance, the money that goes into this, let's say, camera traps, all cost like 500 to $1,000. So if you have 10 camera traps that are deployed, that's $10,000, and all of this money, for instance, goes to the manufacturers of the camera traps, rather than traditionally,
Mm.
if some of these jobs are done by rangers or by people on the ground, that would still go in within that community. So there are a lot of aspects that sort of worry me and people in the field about, okay, how we can make this work not just for biodiversity but for the people that are doing this, that are working on the ground, and all of these aspects, and not, again, I wouldn't say replace them as like a, I don't think it's possible to replace them, but even sort of, yeah, getting money and like having the money go through
Mm.
one aspect rather than go to another aspect might already impact some of the aspects being done there.
Yeah, I was just thinking, so is it more of the idea that since technologies are still very expensive, especially camera traps and other tools like that, as compared to conservation already getting such limited funds to begin with, that because the technology is so expensive, you'd be spending, I don't know, 60, 70% of your budget just on the tech itself, as opposed to having more funds going to workers that can actually have like a substantial, living wages, or is there something? Is that
Uh,
kind of what you're
yeah,
getting?
so I wouldn't say the technology is that expensive. Of course, like
Okay.
money is relative, and like $1,000 is still a lot of money in different aspects, but it's mainly where the money goes to at the end. Because
Okay.
any money that you invest in like local community efforts sort of has like the money sort of stays within that economy and then sort of
Mm.
has like an added value of like circulating throughout, compared to the money being used, for instance, for camera traps that sort of usually ends up in the US or in one of the few Western countries that build camera traps.
Okay.
And again, that's one worry, and there are several aspects to it compared to how people are impacted, but that's maybe one example of that.
I want to kind of pull back to some of your older projects. What has been one of your favorite projects that you've worked on so far?
So there's so many to think of, but I would say my, because it's still like I'm still currently working on this, but it was a very random coincidence as well, like me getting on this project and I feel like has been such a nice journey so far. Is the coral monitoring project I've done. So there, basically, the goal is uh, that for coral monitoring, it's very hard to do at scale. So usual methods, basically, you have a diver that goes into a field and takes an image of the corals, and then you have to analyze all of this data manually and label this is this coral, this is this coral, and
Mm-hmm.
then from that have an understanding of how the corals are impacted by bleaching or other pollution and other aspects. And the goal here was, can we make something that is very scalable, so that can just be done with a GoPro camera, so it's still relatively cheap compared to other underwater cameras that cost 10 to 100 times more, and just by swimming in the reef with a GoPro to be able to map out the entire reef both in 3D but also have information with which corals appear, what's the health status of the corals, and other aspects related to that. So I would say that has been one of the more fun and impactful projects, because also the work done there is being applied on the ground in the Red Sea in different countries. And I can't take that much credit because most of this work is done by collaborators in Switzerland. So I'm just adding on to this project, but I think that's one of the coolest things I've been a part of.
And I'm curious, kind of, in conservation, how do you stay connected to the end goal when I imagine a lot of your time is with your laptop, right? And working on projects very far away from your physical location. How do you, yeah, stay connected through that?
Yeah, I think from that aspect, it has been much easier for me rather than someone that went from the ecology route towards the AI for conservation route. Because for
Mm-hmm.
me, I've always worked on a laptop, and now I have the privilege, instead of working with data like numbers or Excel sheets, now I have the privilege of just looking at animals or corals in my day to day life. So, from that aspect, compared to what I've been used to, this is a much, much better alternative. I would imagine for ecologists that are used to being around those animals, having to stay in front of the laptop is maybe a bit more difficult. But for me, it has always been like a privilege to even like have this opportunity. So
Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that kind of reverse perspective on it. I think it's time, if you're ready, for the conservation hot take. So, for
yes,
listeners, this is a segment where our guest brings a hot, boiling, piping, lukewarm, whatever it could be, a hot take that someone in some way could disagree with. And I'd love to know kind of, Victor, what is your controversy that you're bringing to the table today?
yeah. So I had a long thought about this, and there are several aspects to consider, but I would go with restoration projects are usually a scam. So there are different aspects to this because again, this is a hot take, but I don't also want to discourage people that are working on these things because I think, as with all things, it's not like fully black and white. But my main worry is about restoration projects, so whether it's coral restoration or reforestation efforts, is that a lot of the times is like the easy way of doing it. So the sort of first advice you get if you're environmentally interested and you want to do something is plant a tree, which I think is a nice sentiment, but in general, it's just, in my opinion, doesn't really work. And usually the tree won't sort of suffice or won't adapt to the environment. So there needs to be a lot more thought put in there before doing something rather than just doing that so that we maybe make ourselves feel a bit like we have done something to contribute. And furthermore, the bigger problem I have with restoration projects is that it sort of leads to the mentality that no matter what we lose, it can be saved or restored. So this is especially the case with corals, I believe, where corals are under such devastating like pressures currently, and we see like extinctions and like bleaching events happen throughout, and then we want to believe that we can just set up a small coral colony and plant it and take care of it for a few months and then it will grow back. But in reality, that's almost never the case. And most of these things come from like a good, have like well intentions, good intentions, but at the end, even like the projects themselves fail or they don't really sort of aim up to their expectations or and from that aspect I think we should be more towards trying to protect what we have and like invest in it rather than thinking that we can always save it sometime in the future.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, especially when we think of how ecosystems functions, that there's kind of this critical point and there's this misunderstanding that once you reach the critical point that you can just reverse, that the path to where we got here can just be one-to-one reverse back to where we went. But oftentimes what occurs is you create this alternative new stable state that is not how it was at all, that planting that tree that was there or bringing back a cheetah from 100 years ago it's going, as you say, back into an environment that is completely different and unsuitable to that. And similarly with trees especially, it's, you know, you're planting a tree and they're saying they're planting 10,000, 100,000, but then how many seeds are actually making it to 1 year, to 2 years? And that kind of persistent monitoring and making sure that those trees are actually, you know, becoming trees, typically does not exist in these systems. So you bring up a very, very good point. And I think it also, like my woe is with bringing back extinct species. Not because it's not, you know, it's a cool thing to bring back the past, sure, but the amount of money, as you said before, that is being invested into this technology is hundreds of thousands of dollars that could be diverted into, you know, protecting the species that exist already. And it kind of, that reminds me of that idea of spending money on the camera traps that will go to US manufacturers versus spending money to the communities and protecting what already, you know, is there. That kind of reminds me of that as well. So I approve of the hot take.
For sure agree with the extinction take as well. Like, it's very, I would say from a scientific perspective, it's very amazing that we can think of doing this, but there's so many pressing issues to do right now that I think spending time on this we need to be like a utopia and not have any more extinctions happen before we can think about like de-extinctions.
Yeah, I think it's this kind of idea of just because we can does not mean we should, you know?
Yeah.
And now, I'm curious if you have any advice for people that are curious about going into AI, computer science, for conservation applications. What would be one piece of advice you have to those inquisitive about this career path?
Yeah, so I would maybe start off with the more general advice. So for me, as I mentioned, I didn't know anyone in this field, or I come from like a very different background to where I am now, and sort of getting there was a lot of effort and different undertakings. But basically, my advice in general, if you're passionate about something, just try to connect with people, reach out, and get like involved in the community in some way. So for me, this was doing this AI for seals project, doing this coral monitoring project. A lot of these projects just started off because I found something where I had like some spare time after my studies, so I could contribute to that, or I was just passionate about it and wanted to do something. And at the end, that all of these things sort of came with more opportunities afterwards. That sort of it's like a ladder basically. You start off with one thing that leads to another, and by the time sort of a few years pass, and then you're maybe at the point where you want it to be. And that was the case for me. So a lot of the aspects that helped me get to where I am is just talking to people, trying to get involved in projects and collaborations like that side. And I think again with AI and computer science and a lot of technologies now, I think it's so nice that you don't have to be at a specific place to be able to contribute. So just if you have a laptop, that should be enough for you to like reach out and try to make some collaborations happen. So on that end, for AI for conservation specifically, there are a few communities that I would say are the best sort of starting point. So one of them is called wildlabs.net. So it's a conservation tech forum. I'm also one of the leaders of the AI for conservation group there. So it's a community of like a few thousand people. And if you're interested at all, you can just go there, look into other people, see discussions, ask anything you want, and also join events we're organizing. So both to familiarize yourself with the possibilities, get to know the topics and different aspects. And there's also a AI for Conservation Slack channel, which also has like 3-4 thousand people that is basically the main hub where people post their research, advertise opportunities, and the main spot where you can find people to work with. So I would advise those two things.
That's awesome. So then, what is next for you? What is the progress of your PhD? What are you curious about looking into in the future?
Yeah. So with my PhD, I'm still relatively new. So I'm still in my first year. I still have almost 3 years left. So from that side, there are a lot of things to do, and I know I have like some plans regarding what I want to do. But within a PhD, I know it's normal that all of these things sort of change throughout time. But basically, the goal within my PhD, I would say, is try to figure out what are these biases, how we can fix them, and how much can we know as we're moving more and more towards this big data age within conservation and acquiring much more data, how we can make certain that all of this data is verifiable and fair, so that the outcomes using that data are fair, and basically trying to make models that uh, evaluate how fair a model should be before we sort of use it in practice. And there's a lot more research to be done on that. So I think that's I'm really privileged to be in a position like this where, again, due to it being such a new field, there's so much things that you can explore, which I think is like a great opportunity. After that, there are a lot of aspects. So I think I would stay in academia and my main goal is conservation. So it's not science necessarily, but I would want to contribute towards applications of conservations. If I can do that through science, that's great. But I basically all of my work, even now, I sort of tailor to be usable for people rather than just be something that maybe can help someone. Uh, Regarding what and where, it's still probably too early to decide. I might want to go back to Macedonia, where I'm from, and continue some research there because we also have a lot of biodiversity, and I think it's very important to also protect and treasure that. But again, I have projects that I'm currently working on across the world, and it's so nice to just be able to do all of these things. And I hope in the future that will still be the case, where I have the possibility to do these collaborations.
And if anyone listening would like to reach out or get in contact with you, how should they go about this?
So I don't have any specific social media, but I think as long as you Google my name, you will get emails or a LinkedIn, and feel free to like connect, reach out to me about anything you want. And as I said, wildlabs.net is a pretty good place to find myself, but also more people working on these topics. Maybe someone that has more similar interest than you, or is located more nearby, and you can reach out to them as well there.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Viktor, for joining us today. It has been the utmost privilege, honor to just hear the taste of the research that you're doing, and I'm so excited to hear about the progress that you have with this in the future. And I want to dig in and read all the papers that you write for sure, because this is really tickling my brain, I must say. So thank you so much for joining us on the Resilience Tracks podcast today. And if you have any final words, this is your opportunity to say so.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It was a pleasure to share my thoughts and research with people. I don't think I have any specific questions, but yeah, thanks.
Yes. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining, and thank you to those who are listening. This was the Resilience Tracks podcast, and we will see you. Well, I guess we won't see you, but you will hear us next time. Thanks.